Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start this new edition right now. Thank you for joining us. We begin in Cuba, where the European Union's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, who says the EU is keen to increase economic relations with the country. Mogherini is in Cuba for a two-day visit where she was expected to discuss speeding up the implementation of the political dialogue and cooperation agreement between the two sides. The EU is Cuba's second biggest trading partner. Mogherini's first official meeting in Havana was with the Foreign Investment and Cooperation Minister, Rodrigo Manmerica.
Your personal contribution here has been very important, so we are very happy to receive you.
And our correspondent in Havana, Laura Prada, has more details on Mogherini's agenda during her visits.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you. Indeed, today the High Representative and Vice President of the European Union, Federica Mogherini, started a visit to Cuba that confirms the strong relationship between the European Union and Cuba. On her two-day agenda for the visit to the island, there are some highlights that include today the conference she will be giving at the Old Havana University about European Union and Latin America, and also that she will be meeting with the Culture Minister Abel Prieto. On her tomorrow's agenda also is very significant. The meeting she will be holding with the Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez. Among these visits, she will also be holding other encounters with Cuban authorities. We must remember that last November entered into provisional application the political dialogue and cooperation agreement between Cuba and the European Union, the first one ever between these two parts. This is all I have for now. I get back to you.
Laura Prada with that report. The campaign has begun for Ecuador's referendum on the 4th of February. President Lenin Moreno proposed 7 questions to be put to the electorate. But several of the questions have been strongly opposed by the former President Rafael Correa and his supporters. Our correspondent Denise Herrera has more.
The campaign for Ecuador referendum begins today. There are 4 organizations registered for this campaign, 35 in favor of the yes to the 7 questions proposed by the President Lenin Moreno and 5 in favor of the no to at least some of the questions. The most controversial questions are those that deal with a ban on re-election, which is seen as preventing the former President Rafael Correa from being a candidate in the future election. Another that will restructure the Council for Citizen Participation set out by the President Rafael Correa, and finally that which revoke a law that limits property speculation, also introduced by the President Correa. The referendum will take place on February 4, and the Electoral Council has decided to distribute almost $40 million to these 4 organizations that taking part in the campaign. All these come at the same time in the impeachment trial against Ecuador Vice President Jorge Glass continue. The Oversight Committee of the National Assembly decided to hear evidence of the charge and from the defense these days. The committee also agreed to ask to the state prosecutor, Carlos Baca, to report the investigation into the Odebrecht bribery case and explains his reason to accusing Glass. So it looks like that the political situation here in Ecuador will be tense the next day. So we back to you in the studio.
Our Ecuadorian correspondent, Denise Herrera. Radio Nacional's workers in Argentina are on strike and are holding assemblies against massive layoffs and the reforms by President Mauricio Macri's government. More details in the next report.
Protests due to press workers' layoffs are becoming a regular occurrence in Argentina. At the entrance of Radio Nacional, you can see the indignation and shock on the faces of employees who were fired and are now denied entrance to the station in the first working day of 2018.
We are living the worst scenario imaginable. Our colleagues were sent a layoff telegram, but they didn't receive it. And when they came for work today, they didn't let them pass.
Por un lado, con mucha angustia y hasta uno se encuentra con compañeros que no participan de la vigilia o que no participan.
There are colleagues that are not participating, but they are on their offices crying because it's a very ugly situation. Yet we're very close because this kind of abuse creates a lot of unity.
The labor reform and the adjustments implemented by Macri's government that left thousands unemployed also affect public workers, and the authorities are refusing to rehire them.
En algún momento denunciamos o venimos denunciando el vaciamiento de la radio pública.
We have been denouncing massive layoffs in the public radio across 45 national stations. We have so few people that some stations can no longer broadcast on the weekends because they do not have enough operators. This is the destruction of the most important network in Latin America.
180 employees of several digital television stations received the news in the middle of the holidays that their contracts will not be renewed in 2018. There are already over 2,500 journalists fired in the last months, and big media corporations are not shining a light on the difficult time that they're going through.
With the policies of this government, everywhere we are suffering what the workers' movement have been suffering. And now, increasingly, there are less voices, less freedom of speech.
In the next days, there will be new massive layoffs, which will equate to more than 13% of employees in the public media. Press unions have announced a plan to defend themselves, although in the face of Macri's systematic elimination of their rights and their jobs, the future looks uncertain.
The death toll from a bus that plummeted off a steep cliff near Peru's capital, Lima, on Tuesday has climbed to 48. According to the police, 36 bodies were transferred to the morgue of the town of Chancay, while another 12 bodies were still trapped inside the bus. 6 survivors who were suffering from serious injuries were evacuated to hospitals in Lima, Callao, and Chancay. The bus was carrying some 50 passengers when it crashed into a trailer truck around midday and skidded off the road about 48 kilometers north of Lima, in a location known as Pasamayao.
El río se aumentaba y en eso, no, por el peso, y como usted ve, las tablas están mojadas, se había caído, no. Y hecho, no, que también hemos comunicado, no.
Also in Peru, there was another accident. 16 people were missing after the Irapeteri Bridge collapsed in the southeast of Cusco. The pedestrian bridge fell from a height of 150 meters. The accident took place in full view of passers-by who were watching the level of the Cambiri River rise after heavy rains. And we have more news in a minute, so stay with us. Welcome back. Today marks the anniversary of the formation of the West Indian Federation. Federation was a short-lived political union that began January 3, 1958. It was seen by some as a precursor to the Caribbean community CARICOM in that it was made up of several West Indian islands. The countries that made up the West Indian Federation were former British colonies that spanned Jamaica to Trinidad and had a combined population of some 3 to 4 million people, with the view to becoming a single state. There was a flag and an anthem, but the entire thing dissolved in May 1962 The same year, countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica opted for full independence, sealing the nail in the West Indian Federation coffin. To discuss the West Indian Federation, we are joined by Dr. Hamid Ghani, who is the head of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Ghani, Happy New Year and thank you so much for joining us.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Today is the anniversary of the West Indian Federation. Could you tell us how it was supposed to work?
Well, the original federation, the federal idea, came out of the Moyne Commission report of 1939, and the British government did not do anything on it until 1947, when the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Arthur Creech Jones, convened a meeting in Montego Bay on the 19th of September 1947, and 11th to the 19th of September 1947. And then they agreed there that they would form a committee for the closer association, a standing closer association committee. That committee reported by 1953, and then by 1955, they had decided on the federal capital site, which was going to be in Trinidad. In 1956, the British government took the West Indian Federation bill to Parliament, and in the UK, in 1957, a constitution was made, and on the 3rd of January 1958, the Federation came into being when Lord Hales, who was the first Governor General of the West Indies, arrived in Trinidad. And the first federal elections were held in March of 1958 that put the federal government into being.
Professor Ghani.
That was the early beginning, yes.
That was the early beginning. So that was the early beginning, but we also know about the end. I mean, a lot of people, especially people of a certain age in the Caribbean, know about Dr. Eric Williams' famous maths, what is it, 1 from 10 equals north. But what was the real reason for the end of the Federation?
Well, what had happened is that in May of 1960, there was tension in Jamaica between the government and the opposition, and the Premier, Norman Manley, conceded to the leader of the opposition, Alexander Bustamante, that there would be a referendum on the issue, so that when the federal parties met at Lancaster House in March of 1961 to discuss the final details of the 10-member federation, coming into being as an independent state to be called the West Indies, there was the specter of the Jamaican referendum, which was held on the 19th of September 1961. And the result of the referendum was 54% of the Jamaican electorate voted in favor of secession. So you had a virtual jam exit, as it were. And as a consequence of that, it was all downhill from there. The British government conceded that the right of self-determination on the part of Jamaica had to be respected. And then there were negotiations with Trinidad and Tobago to have a federation of 9. And Sir Arthur Lewis was involved in private negotiations with Eric Williams. They could not come to an agreement. The final offer on the table from the federal government of the West Indies was Trinidad and Tobago to pay for 75% of the budget, but only get 50% of the seats in the House of Representatives. That was the deal breaker. So by January 1962, Dr. Williams announced that Trinidad and Tobago would also withdraw from the Federation, and that opened the door to closure, so that by April of 1962, the end was in sight, and May of 62, it was formally over. And then Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago proceeded to their own individual independence by August of 1962.
So is CARICOM the new federation?
Well, there was an attempt at CARIFTA, which was a free trade area, by 1966. And then the British government set up something called associated statehood for the remaining territories of the federation. But Montserrat, that was part of the federation, was returned to direct colonial rule. And the remaining there was 6 countries that were left after this, and then they all went on to get their independence. CARICOM was in 1973. It was an attempt to find some kind of regional economic cooperation, but that perhaps is the closest that we've gotten to what was the original plan for political union of a single federal state to be called the West Indies that was going to consist of 10 states. So we are nowhere near to that, but political union remains an elusive dream that many political leaders talk about, but it has not happened, and there are still difficulties in getting anywhere near to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghani. We've been talking to Dr. Ghani. He's the director of SALISES, the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at UE St. Augustine. On to other news now. The Bolivian Medical Association have announced the possibility of a formal pre-agreement with the government to end 40 days of strike action.
The possibility of a preliminary agreement to end a doctor's strike that lasted more than a month was received with optimism by social movements.
We want to congratulate all national authorities as well as the Bolivian Medical School and medical schools of 9 municipalities that have arranged the pre-agreement.
After 2 days of negotiations with the government, they've conceded to suspending Article 205 of the new criminal code until 2019, which, according to medical representatives, criminalizes their careers. But the controversial stoppage of private health service regulations is still on the table.
There are excellent doctors in our medical schools, but also doctors who are involved in politics. They hide their political interests behind their medical careers. For any doctor who wants to follow a political path, he should contribute to constructing a new health system. But instead, there are few who only care about their own economic interests. We're going to debate these and other issues so we can change our current health system for good.
President Evo Morales has announced that he will meet with representatives of health associations in the following days to define new health policies for the country.
I have received information that some conservatives don't want to change our health system, but we are going to change it. We are obliged to. Changes are hard but necessary, with the purpose of helping the poor majority.
While it remains unknown if the medical associations will accept the preliminary agreement, the government says that the strike forced the suspension of more than 8,000 surgeries as well as 38,000 medical appointments in the public hospitals.
January 3rd marks the 10-year anniversary of the assassination of the Mapuche leader, Matias Catrileo, who was killed by police during a demonstration. Catrileo was taking part in a protest to demand the release of Mapuche political prisoners and the recovery of their ancestral lands when he was fatally shot by police officers. Members of the organization Coordinadora Arauco Mayeco paid tribute to Matias Catrileo on the anniversary of his death.
On the 10-year anniversary of the death of our comrade Matias Catrileo, a former member of our organizations, I want to send a message and pay tribute to all of our people who, like Matias, are fighting for the recovery of our ancestral lands and the liberation of our people. I want to highlight Matias' revolutionary ideas which made him a martyr of the Mapuche community, especially his commitment of process of recovering our territory. That is what we have been doing since the beginning of the National Liberation Front. He took part in many demonstrations to stop the illegal appropriation of our land, and he will always be remembered for his clear stand in favor of territorial recovery based on the autonomy and the self-determination and liberation of the Mapuche people.
We'll be back very soon, so stay with us. In 2017, the United States saw a significant increase in violent and hate crimes. The government of Donald Trump has consistently failed to properly respond to these events or condemn the perpetrators of some of the worst massacres seen in the country. Our correspondent in Washington, Francesca Emanuel, joins us with more details.
Pues el 2017 ha sido un año de mucha violencia en este país y de
2017 has been an extremely violent year for the United States. The deadliest massacres happened in Las Vegas, leaving 58 dead, and in Texas, where 26 people died. In both of these massacres, the perpetrators were white American males, yet neither massacre was branded as a terrorist act. This goes to show the prejudice by authorities who only brand acts committed by foreigners or people of color, in particular of Muslim descent, as terrorism. We must not forget that in August, President Donald Trump refused to condemn the white supremacist who purposefully ran over dozens of anti-fascist protesters in Charlottesville, killing Heather Heyer in the process. Experts have said that Trump's endorsement of hate against immigrants, Muslims, women, and the LGBTI community, among others, is linked directly to the increase of hate crimes in the country at large. Another cause for the increase in violence is the ease with which guns can be obtained. But this is a topic that both the White House and Republicans refuse to even mention, given that their political campaigns have usually received funding by the NRA.
Pero de eso ni siquiera quiere hablar la Casa Blanca.
Emmanuel with that report. 2017 also saw an increase in gun violence in the United States, with public shootings across the country on the rise. We have more details in the next report.
And I will do everything in my power, Zach Parrish, to honor you.
They are crying because of the death of a policeman in the United States' last shooting of the year, which occurred in Denver, Colorado, in the west of the country, at the hands of Matias Catrileo, an Iraq war veteran. Another 4 officials and 2 civilians were hurt.
And of the nation. Never in my world have I would have imagined this.
According to the Gun Violence Archive, 2017 leaves a total of 15,519 deaths due to firearms, and a total of 345 shootings in the U.S. The Commander-in-Chief sent his condolences and avoided talking about gun control, just as his administration has done with other related tragedies, including the biggest shooting in U.S. history, the Las Vegas massacre, which claimed 58 lives.
I think that there will be certainly time for that policy discussion to take place, but that's not the place that we're in at this moment. But certainly I think that there's a time for that to happen.
Since the arrival of Donald Trump to the White House, there have been 3,000 more gun violence incidents registered than last year. The violence perpetrated by white supremacist groups have also increased. The main affected groups are African Americans, Latinos, and Muslims.
The connection between his hateful anti-Muslim rhetoric and anti-Muslim bias incidents and hate crimes within the United States. This past year, just the first 3 quarters of the year, we've recorded almost 200 anti-Muslim hate crimes. And we're expecting that this year is going to be the worst on record for incidents targeting the Muslim community since 9/11.
After September 11, 2001, the year with the highest hate crimes rate against Muslims was the last year of 2017. Violence also touched the white community in Charlottesville last August, when a neo-Nazi ran over anti-fascist protesters, killing a young woman and leaving 20 wounded.
Israeli troops have shot dead a 17-year-old Palestinian protester during a clash in the occupied West Bank. People gathered outside of the morgue to grieve for the boy who was involved in clashes with Israeli soldiers. More than 15 children have been killed by Israeli forces in 2017. Palestinians have condemned President Donald Trump's threat to withhold future U.S. aid payments to the Palestinians over what he called their unwillingness to talk peace with Israel. Trump tweeted to say that Washington gives Palestinians hundreds of millions of dollars a year and get no appreciation or respect. Hanan Ashwari, a member of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's Executive Committee, said in response, "We will not be blackmailed."
I would say that Palestinian rights are not for sale, and we will not succumb to blackmail. There are imperatives and requirements for peace, and unilaterally President Trump has destroyed them. He has even sabotaged our efforts at achieving a just peace and getting freedom and dignity for the Palestinian people. By recognizing occupied Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, he has not only disqualified himself as a peace broker or a mediator by taking sides and by becoming complicit in Israel's occupation, he has also totally sabotaged, he has totally destroyed the very foundations of peace.
Israel government will today approve of plans to force tens of thousands of African migrants to leave over the next 3 months by threatening to arrest those who stay. Under the plan, some 38,000 migrants who entered Israel illegally, mainly Eritreans and Sudanese, will have until the end of March to leave. Prime Minister Netanyahu said in the announcement that Israel will ramp up enforcement and allocate a budget for manpower for the plan's realization.
The situation as I see it now is very bad and difficult. We are being traded. I'm not from Uganda or Rwanda. How come the Prime Minister decides to send people to other countries without paper or permits, with nothing? After 10 years, how is it possible? It's like selling us as slaves.
The infiltrators have a simple choice: to cooperate with us and willingly leave in a respectable, humane, and legal manner, or else we will obviously have to operate with the other tools at our disposal, which are also legal. I hope they will choose to cooperate with us.
North Korea has reopened a hotline with South Korea almost 2 years after it was disabled. A North Korean official announced the hotline's reopening to discuss attending the Winter Olympics. South Korea has confirmed it has received a call from the North at 15:30 local time on Wednesday.
By upholding the decision by the highest leadership, we will make close contact with South Korea in a sincere and faithful manner. We will discuss practical level issues regarding the dispatch of our delegation.
Toxic water and dust are endangering the lives of tens of thousands of South Africans living in the Soweto township of Johannesburg. More than a century of gold mining has left piles of bleach mine waste throughout Johannesburg's landscape. There are more than 200 mining dumps with 6 billion tons of waste containing toxic substances like arsenic, lead, and uranium. According to researchers, there are 2 million people at risk because of the toxic waste.
We see the highest levels of lead in the blood of the children who live within 500 meters of the mine tailings dams, and much lower levels if they live 2 or 3 kilometers away.
We clean 4 times, 5 times a day. Sometimes we don't even clean. We sleep there, and then we inhale that thing. It kills us.
And with that report, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Sunny Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Enjoy our programming